We're talking about something uncomfortable and out of the blue today, so I'm going to do my best to address this in a factual and logical way rather than an emotional way. This video is all about emergency preparedness, and this is something that I have become increasingly passionate about over the past, year, 2 years or so. Vancouver is located in an earthquake zone, and this might be news to you. It's often not talked about, and a lot of people don't know this. And I've noticed that a lot of international students in particular are not aware of this. And quite frankly, it makes sense. It's not something that Vancouver or Canada particularly advertises, nor does UBC. And we haven't really had anything catastrophic happen here in a very, very long time, if ever. I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who has experienced a couple earthquakes, but they were pretty small, didn't cause a lot of damage, and weren't particularly life-changing. I do just want to acknowledge that some of you watching may have experienced something, regardless of whether it was an earthquake or something else, that was a little more detrimental to your life. I really just want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence in helping prepare you literally for any possible element of life in Vancouver. So there's 4 main parts to this video, being what is an earthquake, what you can do before to be prepared, during, and then after. So hopefully that gives you a bit more clarity as to what we're going to be talking about and how we're going to be talking about things. And then we'll wrap up the video. But yeah, anyways, let's dive in. Why don't we? I think this is all really fascinating, definitely scary, but also really fascinating from a scientific and from a geographical and geological perspective. Vancouver is located in the Cascadia Subduction zone, and that is a zone between the Juan de Fuca plate and the North American plate. The North American plate and the Juan de Fuca plate are butting heads, more or less like this. But as it's called, a subduction zone, what is happening is the Juan de Fuca plate is slowly subducting beneath the surface of the North American plate. There's a lot of tension building up between these two plates like this. And what will inevitably happen one day is a slip, in which the Juan de Fuca plate will subduct beneath the North American plate. And that, my friends, is where we feel and experience an earthquake. Why I'm really adamant about making this video is because historically, there have been earthquakes that occur along the Cascadia subduction zone frequently, every couple hundred years, every few hundred years, and we are long overdue at this point. There's a really big earthquake that we are expecting to have hit the west coast of Canada, and it will also affect regions far beyond that, north and south. I will quickly add that the projected magnitude of the earthquake that is supposed to hit, the big one, is upwards of 9.0 in magnitude, which is pretty dang hefty. It would be really strong, really powerful, and it's really difficult to guess what the effects of that would even be. But being in a coastal region, Vancouver is also prone to tsunamis for that reason. We've seen many examples of this in other parts of the world and just how powerful and damaging tsunamis can be. But that's just one part of this whole earthquake situation. So as much as the ground will shake and the lands will shift, the water will too. So that is another element of this emergency preparedness conversation that I want to have, because it's not just about protecting yourself during the shaking, it's also about protecting yourself from what comes after. I will provide you with all of the resources and links that I looked at and referenced down in the description box below, and this really is just meant to be a very quick introduction to what an earthquake is in the Vancouver context. Okie dokie. The 3 main dimensions of preparing for before something actually happens is making sure that you have a plan, that you have an emergency kit, and that you're staying informed and up to date. So in terms of having a plan, this often looks like having all your contacts written down, having a map, a meeting spot, and also having a general idea of where you are going to go and what you are going to do in the event of an emergency. So whether this is a fire or a flood or an earthquake in this particular example, knowing where you're going to go that will be safe, accessible, and also a generally good place to meet that is far from the water is really important. And then on top of that, having an emergency kit packed that you can quickly grab and take with you if you need to is also really, really important. It's really difficult to sit here and think about all the things that could possibly happen during an earthquake, and therefore it's really difficult to possibly prepare for all of these different things. In terms of preparing and making a plan, you need to know your hazards, you need to know your community members, you need to know where your family, your friends are in relation to you. You need to gather your supplies, and you need to stay informed. Those are all really big pieces of actually knowing what to do when something happens. Knowing where you're gonna go, who you're gonna meet, and what you're gonna bring are the biggest pieces of forming an emergency plan. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to sit down and think about that, connect with people who might be interested in making a plan like that with you. This is something that my friends and I have started the conversation on just a little bit more because, well, living in kits, we're basically at sea level and pretty dang close to the water, and most of us live in pretty old buildings. So knowing what our plan is a really important piece of being prepared for anything that could happen. In terms of preparing an emergency kit, there are a few key things that you need to include that'll actually prolong life. I've got a lovely comprehensive list here from the city of Vancouver for things they recommend you keep in a grab-and-go bag, and I'm quickly going to list these off because I cannot remember them all. I have the short-term memory of a fish. Things that they recommend you keep in it are a sleeping bag or a blanket, some all-season clothing, bottled water, enough to sustain you for 72 hours, snacks, a whistle, a flashlight, batteries, radio, extra batteries, a first aid kit and personal medications, toiletries, any glasses or contact lenses if you have difficulties with vision, photocopies of your emergency plan, ID, insurance papers, other important documents like a passport or a driver's license or birth certificate, cash, pens and a notepad, and sentimental or comforting items. This is a pretty comprehensive list. Again, I'm gonna link this all below so you don't have to remember it. Emergency kits obviously are very, very important, and I've actually, oh my god, okay, I've made one, and it's a little heavy and it's a little big. I'm gonna do a full video all about what I've packed in my emergency kit. Yeah, so if you want to see me walk through that and get the links to all the things I have in my emergency kit, stay tuned for another video because I'm gonna walk you through that whole big backpack. There are a lot of things that you can include in an emergency kit to help you prepare for any particular emergency or situation. And honestly, as much as it is difficult to predict what you could even possibly need in those moments besides a hug and some comfort, it's so important to have something like this at the ready, even if you don't think you're ever going to use it. That more or less wraps up our conversation of what to do before an earthquake in order to prepare yourself for one. Any sort of natural disaster really, but in this specific instance, an earthquake. And now we are going to shift into the conversation of what to do during an earthquake. So moving into this conversation about what to do during an earthquake often evokes a lot of different emotions, and I know for me, I do not like thinking about it at all. I really do not. But I can tell you the earthquake I did experience happened late night. It was weird that I stayed up late that night, but I did. I was watching a movie, I was enjoying myself, and I was sitting in bed, and in my bedroom I have these attic storage doors, and they're not very secure, so I was sitting in bed and I heard them rattling. I really thought something was about to jump out of them, I will not lie. But then the rattling got more intense and more frequent and louder. It was very, very subtle at first and progressively got more intense. To a point where I was sitting in bed, my doors were more or less flapping and I was feeling the shaking, and then all of a sudden there was this big jolt. I so vividly remember that, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. What is that all about? It honestly didn't hit me that it was an earthquake until I felt that big jolt from side to side. And I remember running to my parents' room saying, Mom, 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 Dad, 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 was that an earthquake? Did you feel it? And it was kind of funny, but also I was like, how did you sleep through that? Because they slept through it, and they just kind of like sat up out of bed and rubbed their eyes and kind of were like, oh, why are you waking us up? And I was like, did you not just feel the earthquake? That was the wrong thing to do. What you are supposed to do in the event of an earthquake, if you are inside a building, is to get away from any windows or any large breakable objects that could fall on you, that could shatter and cut you. You want to stay away from anything like that. You want to seek shelter either under or beside a large piece of sturdy furniture. Really, if you are inside, the objective is to get away from windows that could break, get away from anything that could break or explode or burn, shatter, whatever. So there are a few things that you want to avoid as best as you can if you are inside specifically. Number one being doorways, elevators, windows, bookcases, tall pieces of furniture, things on the wall, fireplaces, anything that could burn or shatter or explode. Or if you're outside, get into a very large open space away from trees, away from buildings or power lines. An earthquake, it can last anywhere from 30 seconds, like the one I experienced, to upwards of 3 minutes. And the longer it lasts for, the stronger the earthquake is. So the during part really does vary on how intense the earthquake is, but the principles remain the same. It's stay safe, shelter yourself, and protect yourself from injury. Those are the three main goals during an earthquake. At this point, we have made it through the before and the during of an earthquake. Now we are going to talk about what happens after. And there are a few different pieces to this, naturally. So there are going to be a few different things that we talk about. The first is aftershocks. So after an earthquake is over, it's not technically over. There's just a few little more surprises there for us. So an aftershock is more or less that last burst of energy that comes from the earth settling back into place. So when an earthquake ends, you want to stay where you are for roughly 30 seconds, maybe a minute, just to see if there is any other shaking, which could then create another opportunity for things to fall, for things to explode, for things to collapse, whatever it is. So making sure that you are still holding shelter for just a little bit longer after the earthquake finishes is a really, really big part of keeping you safe. I didn't even take shelter in that story that I shared. I did not even consider aftershocks. I was just like, was that an earthquake? The answer was yes, it was in fact an earthquake. And you know, maybe in that situation, given it was not very strong and that there was no structural damage to my home, it's probably okay. Good practice would have been seeking shelter and staying put until I was certain there were no more aftershocks. Obviously, living in a coastal region, we also need to think about tsunamis. I don't want to, but we do need to. They say that after an earthquake, you have anywhere from like 7 to 20 minutes to get to high ground. And living in Vancouver, in Kitts specifically, most things are at sea level, if not like just above. I think where I live, I'm only about like 10 or 12 meters above sea level, which is not that high at all. UBC is just about 100 meters above sea level, which is much higher than Kitsilano, but still, that's not that high when you think about the magnitude of a natural disaster like this. If you are already at high ground, great, stay where you are if it's safe. If you are not at high ground, you need to get to high ground. Getting to high ground is essential. You want to stay away from power lines, fallen trees, fallen buildings, and you want to get away from the coast. You need to get to high ground. UBC is probably one of the highest, most accessible points. So making sure you get to high, sturdy ground, again, away from any hazards, is key. And obviously you want to do your best to take your lovely earthquake kit with you if you can. That is the best option. Again, there are a lot of really great resources online that I have looked at and will link below for you to actually look at yourself if you are interested. If you're in a position where you do not need to evacuate where you are, You want to do your best to fill any bottles, bowls, or bathtubs with water if it's clean. You want to avoid using the toilet to prevent any sewage that needs to stay in the pipes from coming out of the pipes. Another really big thing is that you want to turn off any gas appliances or sources of gas into and out of your home. Another really big part of the after is trying to connect with your people, whether it be friends, family, your neighbors. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to things like emergency preparedness and earthquake preparedness, but I honestly don't have the mental capacity for that. Making this video on its own was enough, but just something that I felt was so freaking important. It really frustrates me to see that different organizations and institutions are not proactively talking about this. And frankly, I can understand why. It causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear for something that we have no control over and also cannot predict in any way. So I get it, get why they don't talk about it. But at the same time, it does a huge disservice to everyone that's living here when we blatantly ignore something that would alter everybody's life. I know for me, it's not easy to talk about just because it's so uncomfy, and I live in a basement by the water. Woohoo! I love living here. Yay! It's expensive and dangerous. Woohoo! Anyways, in all seriousness, I really do love living here, and frankly, you can't live anywhere without a little bit of risk, I suppose. Being prepared is the one thing that has brought me the most peace of mind when thinking about what could happen in the future. That's pretty much it from me today. I don't really have anything else to add, and frankly, I don't feel like I have enough lived experience in this department to be able to speak to this topic as fully as I would have liked to. That all being said, I've included a lot of resources and references that you can go and turn to if you don't feel that I have addressed this as fully as you would have liked. I will link them down in the description box below. So I hope you learned something from today's video and that it's equipped you with some new knowledge or resources that'll help you navigate anything like this if it should happen while you live in Vancouver or an earthquake zone in general. But that's pretty much it for me today. So thank you again for watching. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time. Well, you'll see me. All right, bye guys.